What's up, everybody? It's Sean here with Easy Street Billiards. Let me clean this up really quick. Boom. So is it Thursday today? Good morning, everybody. We're gonna do a little AMA. A lot of stuff to talk about today. If anybody gets on the live and has anything that they want to input, ask a question about, you want me to go into greater detail, less detail, let me know. Vic's over there fielding the chat.
Hello.
She will get involved when necessary. All right, so I'm just going to go down this list here. Some of this is it's not very well structured so much because I just kind of like the stream of getting it done. And then when an idea comes in, I just get there. So this came up today. I think that one of the issues that people have when they're trying to get better at pool is you know that you need to change. You know that you got to modify your system or whatever it is, work on your technique, and yet even knowing that it can be a struggle to change. And part of, I think, just the human condition is kind of like this desire to kind of like relax and chill and not get out there and and it's like a momentum thing, really. Like, I think that you don't realize if you get good momentum going that it doesn't take that much force to keep the ball rolling and then reposition it. What's difficult is when the ball stops and now you got to like pick it up and you got to push it and you got to keep it moving and get it moving, and that's an activity that's difficult. So I think that people resist that push so hard that they'll just like let the ball just sit there without realizing that, once you start getting the ball rolling, that as long as you just keep applying, pressure and consistency, that the ball can roll and move and you can generate a lot of progress and change. And that embracing that difficulty initially is really the hard part, that once you get used to that happening and you know that it's going to happen, it's much more, simple is to just see that, okay, I want to modify my behavior. Say I'm in pool terms, I want to work on, my cut shots. So then I want to enforce a change. I want my cutting percentage to increase. Maybe I want to work on using inside and outside English per se on these cut shots. And I want to just improve dramatically in all areas. So then instead of, hitting balls and playing against my friends, for 2 to 3 hours on one night, I'm going to find a way to either keep that session going or add another session in where I'm specifically going to work on making that shot and working on those drills. And you'll see that when I describe what's happening, that in order to make that change, you have to add in that time and that energy to squeeze out a little bit of more time into your week to practice pool so that you can continue to do the fun thing that you want to do, which is play against your friends or whatever. But then you also want to improve. And in order to really improve at this game in an efficient manner, it's helpful to practice by yourself quite often, to learn specific shots and to be able to repeat certain situations that happen that you're not familiar with. And by doing a lot of repetitions at once, you can get more familiar more quickly with something because you can have the muscle memory achieved more quickly. If you're waiting for the same shot to appear in a game, it may only come up once in a while, and now you can't really improve that technique in that game unless the shot happens to come up. And, you know, maybe you have enough control to where you can set yourself up to have more of these types of shots happen, or you can, you know, but anyways, point is you have to set aside a little bit of extra time. The thing is that once you've done that initially, now you can just clear your schedule at that moment for that time period and then apply. This is actually my training session for the week where I'm going to like spend 2 to 3 hours practicing different things that I was failing at since the last practice session. And I'll write down a couple different things. And then when it's time to practice, I'll look at it and maybe I'll work on one of those things. And it doesn't matter how long the list gets, because if you just continue to have that once a week session, you just keep taking whatever you think is the most important thing to work on that session and work on that and get just a little bit better at that. And now all of a sudden you see how the initial change of adding the day was difficult, but now that you've done it, now it's not going to be that much more difficult to just maintain it. As long as you set it up initially to where it was a sustainable activity, now you can actually just keep the ball rolling and habitualize it through just like, yeah, every week we're going to do this same time. Part of the drill of like learning how to get better at pool is partly about learning how to like get your schedule right to where you can actually work on your game and still enjoy yourself. Too much practice gets boring for some people. Not enough competition makes it just not as spicy, and you kind of like, you know, you got to have a reason to get out there. Like I certainly practice more myself when I have goals. So part of that is like, well, you know, you got to set goals for yourself, and then that forces you to change. And then now you just keep setting goals, and it's like it becomes a habit, and then you can really make a lot of progress. It's just understanding that that's how the change happens, is through that initial like burst of energy, and then a sustained effort after that, and then a management of the lifestyle change that's happening in order to create permanent, lasting like growth over time, not just a single change and then we plateau and we stay there, but like a continued stacking of your ability through scheduling change into your life and creating more environmental, you know, situations where you can grow that will help you with that overarching thing, which maybe if you're getting better at pool, you know, for instance, you can do other things and just practice more. You can visualize in your mind when you have a free moment, and that takes energy at the beginning. But then once you have that in there, now it's like every time you're like chilling, instead of watching your phone, you can be doing a little bit of visualization of your success, of your like embodiment of the higher level of pool that you're working to achieve. All right, moving along. You got anything? This is an interesting one. It's just a kind of a more of a thought experiment I'm going to pose to y'all to think about. And this is focused towards people that aspire to become hopefully great players in their time. And if, you know, if their lifestyle allows it, then they will get good and maybe become a champion someday, right? So one of the things that I think it's helpful to think about, if you were trying to become a champion, is to kind of take a list of all the things that goes into that. You know, like for instance, like with pool, right? In order to be a champion, it seems as though, you know, traveling quite often and being available to travel internationally to multiple events a year, and, you know, put in a lot of time on the road to have access to the other great players that are also doing the same thing and be on the tour, and then learn how to make money and doing all that. You have to be thinking about like the fact that that has to be exciting for you to be doing. Otherwise, it's probably not going to happen, because there are people that are excited to do that, you know, to travel extensively, to, you know, not be home very often, and to be constantly being tested, you know, to their max with endurance as far as having to travel, not getting necessarily great rest every time, jet lag, etc., and all those things that go along with that. and you have to kind of think, oh, okay, is that really what I want? You know, and that can kind of guide you to decide, maybe what I want to do is just see how good I can get without having to necessarily travel extensively. And then maybe that's going to cap my growth because I won't have access to the top tier ability, except for a little bit less often, you know, and it is what it is. Then in that case, you might think, oh, okay, well, what do I really want, you know, my life to be like? Because it's more about how you want to feel about how your life is going than how your life is really going. If you think about it, no one really, I mean, I think everyone wants the best for everyone else. With that being said, everyone kind of knows that you're making your own decisions as a grown-up so that you kind of have the life that you've decided to have. And no one is really stopping you from, you know, having a certain life. You're just choosing to do it your way, and everyone else is pretty much okay with that. And understanding that that's how it is like, well, now the goal for you yourself is to feel good about what you decide your life is going to be like. And part of that is like, well, you got to think about what kind of life, you know, what kind of different lives you might want to have, and then kind of like get a sense for how much you'd like to be there. And then once you kind of have that idea, then it can tell you, okay, what's my pathway to get to that thing? If you want to be a top player, and I feel like, oh, okay, I'd like to be, you know, a great player in the area, you know, and maybe I spend 2 seconds describing my situation in nutshells, that there's not a ton of like top tier talent in this area. And that puts me in the higher area of like being better than almost everybody else that's around here. And, you know, people look at you a little bit differently, and that's part of being, you have to be okay with that part of it. It's not that I feel like I'm particularly like gifted at the game. With that being said, just because everyone else is not at the same level as me mostly, then, you know, people are going to be coming to you with questions, you know, which is why these videos are happening and other things, because you're kind of the expert because the other top players are not around, because this is not a hotbed area for pool at this time. So you just kind of have to understand what kind of like life are you going to be okay with, you know, if you want to be, you know, available to people to help them as a great player, or if you are kind of like shy in the limelight and you don't necessarily like prioritize helping other people. It's up to you how to live, and you got to decide, oh, what's going to make me feel better, you know, when I go to bed at the end of the night, every night on average, if I do these certain activities. And then that can help you decide, okay, this is really what I want to do, and then I need to learn these things. And then through the growth process of directing how you're growing and learning, that's kind of how I've come across being just a little bit more happy with the way things are going, and not worrying so much about the fact that maybe I am not going to become a top professional pool player in my lifetime, even though at one time that might have been the goal of my life. And you feel like you may have failed, but by not achieving that goal, but then you don't realize that that was not really what you wanted anyways. You didn't realize that until much later, that you had certain things that you just are not really interested in doing that are required in order to be a top professional. And that's part of how it is. It's like, well, if you like your job, you're not going to be a professional pool player, because you're going to work instead. And that's just the way it's going to be, you know? So then you have, based off of that, you know, you're going to have a certain life that you're going to be okay with. If you really enjoy your life situation, you know, you may not be able to be great at pool to the level that you could be if you sacrificed more time and exchanged that time that you're doing that other thing that you love so that you can get better at pool. And it's all about understanding for yourself, what do you really want to get from the game, and what do you want to give to the game in return to get what you want, because it is an exchange. You put your energy into the game in a certain way, and then it returns the same energy to you in how you play, how you operate. So that kind of leads into this point, which is kind of like my focus for myself a lot of time is not so much how well I play, but working on my character in the sense that I want to try to come across as a mature, good sportsman when I'm playing, and that I don't feel that, you know, displays of negativity are productive. So one of my goals is to reduce the amount of negative behaviors that I'm exhibiting while I'm playing pool, because it is a game of mistakes, and you're constantly failing a little bit here, a little bit there, more so some of the time. And you know your response to those mistakes and failures is important over time, because those are your actions, and your actions are stating who you are to everyone around you. They don't know what you're thinking, but they can see what you're doing, and that's how they are going to accumulate information about what kind of person you are. And that's really what kind of person you are, is what you do, because there's no other real metric that you can use. You're not really in charge completely of the thoughts that happen, in my opinion. So you can't be judged necessarily on your thoughts. You can be judged, however, on what actions you perform based off of those thoughts that you have. And for me, I felt like I want to move my life more into a situation where, when I'm playing pool and competing in pool and hanging out with the homies, that I'm showing myself as being a certain thing, and that I'm learning to incorporate those types of, activities, as far as like the way I present myself in the game, as being more relaxed and fun and all that, to try to grow that part of myself inside. So a lot of things that you do with pool that's important is, when you're selecting between 2 to 3 different shots, if you use how you're going to feel about the choice that you made after you've done it, once you've made a mistake, because eventually you're going to make a mistake. So you got to be like, okay, was I okay with the outcome based on the choice that I made, knowing maybe that I could have made a different choice, and that some choices you make, you're not going to necessarily feel good about how you went about shooting the shot, for instance, or just making that decision after the fact, especially if you make a mistake. And to me, it's very important to keep my center and to keep my emotional balance, that I have to really pay attention to when I'm faced with different shots, is to search more inside to feel like, okay, well, which one of these shots am I going to be the okayest with, the most accepting of the result, no matter what happens overall. And what goes into that can be a lot of things, because, if you're working on your game, you're going to shoot shots that on paper might be lower percentage than other shots might be, with the intention of increasing your skill in that area. So you're going to be constantly balancing these things. But what I'm talking about is more in terms of doing things in a way that is not really in the style that you want to present yourself, and that avoiding making those types of decisions and then failing based off of those decisions helps me stay a little bit more balanced in my heart. And because I feel like I'm a big believer in, kind of like, your emotions are really helping or they're hurting you, and that you need to really be, in order to play your best pool, be kind of like in a not necessarily like in the zone, to where you're out of your mind and you're not feeling anything and you're in a complete 100% present, but that at minimum you're relaxing and trying to enjoy the activity, knowing that you're going to have a better learning rate when you're enjoying yourself. So then your perspective on the activity should be that you're here for your own benefit, you know. So speaking from making choices of, I do what makes my heart feel good, not necessarily what in my mind is the proper shot, is kind of what I'm trying to say, is that you gotta shoot your shot because you're the one that has to live with it, and you're the one that deals with the fact that as you shoot certain shots more often, they become habitual, and that if you're not aware of whether or not those shots are benefiting you long term more so than other shots might be, then it's something to really think about from a heart perspective more so than from like a mental, like statistically speaking, this shot is higher percentage than that shot, so you should always shoot this shot. With that being said, is that, you know, it's not always available that the high percentage shot in this scenario is available, and maybe you're working towards increasing your percentages in this other shot specifically because it comes up quite often, and you know, and you're working on that. So then now, in order to be long term more beneficial for your game, you might choose the lower percentage shot of the two in that scenario, knowing that long term your game is going to increase. And then overall, my opinion is that learning and increasing your skill eventually will create wins more so than just trying to win every time you play. You kind of learn how to win through being good, not win by necessarily playing good. You just, well, my system of trying to learn on every shot, actually, even though I'm not necessarily like specifically trying to beat somebody down, is what allows me to then just win, because my system works well enough that even when I'm not exerting total force and max energy into it, that the framework itself holds up enough to where it's all automated. Let's see what we got here. This came up where I think that an important thing to take a step back from your own behaviors and look at is the self-talk that you have, and actually the talk in general, the things that you say and how you say them, and understanding that the definitions of the words that you use are important, and that it's, I think, a little bit underrated how having mindful vocabulary can actually be very beneficial and helpful. And just to not be sloppy with your words, because that sloppiness is just, in general, you want to be as precise as you can, because whenever you're speaking to someone, it's almost like impossible to communicate properly, even if you use the exact word that needs to be used in the, it's just, even the way that you say a word can change what the other person is perceiving you to be saying. And if they don't read you perfectly and you don't read them perfectly, there's 0% chance that one idea will completely come across as exactly what you thought. They will get the gist of it, hopefully, you know, every time. With that being said, they will not be exactly the same idea. The definition of the words that you use is very important, because if you think about how you're trying to communicate with someone, is you have to choose a word that means to that person the same thing that the idea means to you, even if the word that you use for yourself is not the word that they need to hear you say for them to hear the idea that you're saying. And if you're just being sloppy with your words and you're saying that and what and whatever, and not even like describing the detailed like label of the thing precisely, and being vague about the direction of what you're trying to say, it just becomes even more difficult to convey an idea. And then when you're speaking about what you're doing, now you're hearing yourself speak about things, and it's not as defined and clear as it could be. And then when you take that framework and you realize, okay, if I can be a little bit more detailed, and not just that, but understand that the words themselves have kind of a positive and negative emotion attached to them, then you can see that when you say something like, this is the example. If you say to someone, how are you doing today? They just come in the door and they say, not bad. Now, okay, so if you break that down, what they're saying is that they're not bad, which doesn't mean actually anything specific. Now, if you take away the not and then you just take bad and then you reverse it, because that's what the not's supposed to be, then now what you've left with is good. That's what you should be. That's what not bad means, good. But it doesn't really mean good. Not bad means not bad. The words are not bad. That's not the same as good. If you wanted to say good, you should say good, because that's different than not bad. And even though it means the same thing, technically speaking, because good and bad are antonyms of each other, and then not is a negative, meaning when you apply it to bad, then that means it's actually good. However, the words not bad are not the same words as good is. So it is not the same thing. So on those lines of thinking, you should be very careful about when you speak about saying the negative thing in a negative sense, i.e. not bad, versus saying what you could be saying, which is good. Or like, instead of saying, well, I was worried about this thing happening, you don't realize that you could be saying that I need to defend myself against the negative consequence that might happen here. And that instead of worrying about the thing, you could be looking at that as like, this is a challenge to look at this not as a negative concern, but that I can actually reframe it somehow positively. Like, oh, I don't want this thing to happen, because that would be, potentially worrisome. So instead of thinking about that thing, and I will just decide, okay, well, I'm going to shoot a different shot that allows me to not have any worries. I'm going to look for the shot that actually has opportunity involved with it and not consequence. And just by speaking a little bit more clear in your own mind, and like really thinking about what you're about to say, and then when you're playing pool, really think about the energy that you're putting into the game and the way that you're describing what's going on and the way that you feel about it, because that is going to be a habit that you just continue to develop your whole career. Everything you do in pool cycles, and you need to realize that, and you should tailor it to where it benefits you as much as possible. Okay. Anything? We got anybody watching? Excellent. That's all you need is two anyways. Okay. This came up. This is interesting. And this is like, think of a match like it's a soap opera. Like you're playing somebody and it's like a soap opera. When, someone will, they lag or whatever, break the balls. Now the game's going. Each shot, if you watch the way it's going, it's kind of like everyone that's pretty experienced at pool kind of knows what's going on. You're like, they're like, oh, he's in good position here. It looks like he's going to be able to get around the table or whatever to this next shot. And then, then they hit a shot, and then maybe they get a little bit out of line. You're like, ooh, now it's a little bit dicey. Now maybe you won't get there. It's like, it's a little thin, or it's a little far away, or maybe he needs to put a big stroke on the ball, to get to the next shot. Now there's a little bit of drama, right? You hear that? Or if they just stay in line, there's really not that much drama. This is just like, yep, it's all happening the way that we expect it to happen. Nothing is going on here. And you can kind of see how there's like a narrative of the way the game is developing, and you're creating kind of an emotional chain, like a soap opera about the game, because you know eventually the 9 ball is coming, and then we don't necessarily know who's going to make that ball, and that's part of the drama of the game, where you're anticipating based off of what's going on and the players that are involved, what's going to happen in the game, and that's part of the fun of it, is trying to predict what's going to happen. And as a player, as a participant, one of the things that I think is very powerful is to look at the game in a sense of the drama of how it's unfolding, and use that as a tool to help you understand how you need to help craft the narrative and the story of what's going on in order to benefit you the most and to create the outcome that you're looking for through understanding, okay, well, this is the story so far, and based off of that story, what is the next thing that I need to do to continue or to make the story go the way I want it to go? It doesn't even matter where we're at right now. That's the thing. It's all about learning how to play your part and act the part of the person that's going to be victorious at the end of this journey. Now, if it's the end of the match, maybe you don't win, and that's going to be okay, and you'll be okay with that as long as you learn from the experience. You know, you don't take an L if you learn. You know, you either win or you learn, and learning is just as good as winning in most situations, because it allows you to win more later once you've learned that thing that you didn't know that caused you to fail. So if you can create that mindset, you know, then you're going to be good to go. Thinking about the soap opera and the drama of it is that where the story is going to be such that when you fail, typically it's going to be in a classic drama sense where there's a buildup to the thing that creates the intensity, right? The thing that creates this intensity, and then now you have to realize that now's the moment at which this drama, the climax is happening, and that it's very important to have the narrative built in to your mind about how it's supposed to go down for you. That the outcome of the shot, no matter what, is going to be a positive experience. I either make the ball and I win, which is really what you should be thinking the whole time, with the knowledge and understanding that if you make a mistake, that you're immediately, or at least upon reflection later, going to be able to look at that shot and be like, okay, I know what I did wrong. And now in a similar situation, when it comes up, I'm going to be successful because I learned what I needed to learn from that experience, right? And then now that, that day of the soap opera, you lost. However, you went home, you licked your wounds, and now in a future episode, you're going to be victorious. And now over the course of the way the drama unfolds over a long period of time, you can craft the narrative for yourself and for other people to follow along with as well. If you're one of the middle of the pack players and you're working towards trying to become one of the top players, and you start to make changes and do the work and improve your game and really work on it, you're starting to craft an internal narrative that helps you improve, and that eventually people will start to see that, especially the people that are really paying attention. Like the better players are a little bit more conscious, I think, of when other players are getting better, because they can see modifications a little bit more clearly in what people are doing. And then, they'll notice that. And then now you can start to be like, well, maybe I'll start getting on board with your progress if I see that your Fargo has gone up like 10 or 15 points and I see you're putting in more time. And now, we're starting to generate a little bit of buzz, a bigger story than just like, oh yeah, he's been 525, 550 Fargo for the last 15 years, and he plays league once a week, and then, he hasn't really put in the time, but he's a really busy guy, and then, well, you're like, oh, well, he's got semi-retired. Now he's working part-time, started playing a little bit more pool, and you see how the narrative can craft. And it's like, that's what it's all about, to me. It's just understanding that there's a story going on, and we're sort of telling it either consciously or unconsciously, and that we just have to think, okay, what do I really want in the long term to happen in my life, and not worry so much about the day-to-day, soap opera of it, but realize that at the end of, a year or 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that really big changes can happen through just a little bit of like, okay, how do I want to react in this situation and respond in this situation to move me towards that result that I'm really looking for down the road, even if it doesn't come today. Talked about that already. Okay. This is another good one. This talks a little bit about going back to talking about, choosing the shot that you feel good with in your heart. Another thing that I think is important to do is to, over time, as you get older, you kind of have to like decide what your code of conduct is going to be. And then once you've done that, now you pretty much, all you have to do is just focus on following that code of conduct, in that it's not so much about deciding what to do anymore. Now it's like, okay, we know that if I'm nice and help people and contribute to society, that it's going to make me feel better inside, and that's why I'm going to do it. So then, as long as I'm following, that code of conduct where I'm promoting, the morals or whatever that I promote, then I'll feel good about that, because that is, I think a better way to live your life, in my opinion, and I'm going to follow that. That's how I'm going to have more peace in my life. In that, I think that in pool, it's the same kind of thing, where if you establish a system of how you want to play the game, then it can help you center yourself more easily, because you'll have a place to kind of fall back to. This is my default pattern play. And now I can just sit back and be like, okay, this is the way I play the game when it's time to play. And that when I'm practicing, I'm working on increasing my skills so that I can increase my capabilities for when I'm playing. And that's kind of the way that I have my own game set up, is that when I'm not playing in rated matches or playing in tournaments or serious situations, I'm generally speaking just working on different things and messing around and trying to get better at these little details of things that I'm working on. But I have a system that I use when I'm competing, and it's important, and I stick with that. And that, as long as I can stick with that system, meaning like my shot making system and my, and my fundamentals and the way that my shooting system is, I kind of know where I'm at with that, so that I just stick with that. And that if I can do that, and then just, work on being relaxed and being in the moment, that's the best way for me to be successful, because I can then use the shots that I've been learning. I can then use the shots that I've been learning in practice to then utilize them in a match, as part of the way that I have my laws structured, or whatever, or the way that my values are structured, where my value system rewards, growth and learning, and prioritizes it above winning. So that because I know that as long as I continue to grow and get better at pool, that I'll continue to win and have better results over time, because I will be hopefully moving up and up the ranks as I'm growing and getting better. And just by increasing your percentage to, run the balls out, you should win more games. It's not about wanting it or not wanting it. It's just a byproduct of making more shots. So focusing on learning how to make more shots, which a lot to me comes down to your emotional state. So then if you have a way to help yourself stay in a good, consistent emotional state that's productive for pool, then you can stay there more often because you know what it's like. So then it's just about constructing, a mindset that allows you to just be more solid. And a lot of that has to do with finding ways that you feel good about the decisions that you're making, so that even if you fail, that you still feel good about what's going on. And then that allows you to then just continue to have that satisfaction that you're doing it your way, and that you're not really necessarily listening to whoever about how you're supposed to play. I'm doing it the way I want to do it, and I'm good with that because it makes sense to me, and that it's good for society as well in this situation. All right, so this one is, I think this one is pretty important, I think, for people. I think this has a little bit to do with trying to be mature your pool game over time. I think that, at the beginning, pool is fun partly because you're learning new shots, and then you're learning your style, so you're messing around quite a bit, and you're really experimenting heavily, and that's a playfulness. And that over time, if you shift gears from that, just like, oh, I like hitting the ball and seeing where it goes, to like learning how to control it more, and then kind of being like, you know what, actually I want to really get good at this game and learn how to do things properly, as far as like with the intent of learning how to compete and see how far I can go in the world of competitive pool. If that's your journey, then at some point you have to make like a resolution that you're going to let go of a lot of the things that you liked to do before that are not now going to help you become a great pool player. And that you have to, in a sense, you have to resolve to do better, and kind of like give up on some of the childishness ways that you had where you just hit the ball for fun, and now change that where there's a purpose to what you're doing, and that what you're not really trying to do, in a sense, is have fun in a way of just like giggling, but more of fun in the way of like developing and showing that you can you can enjoy, putting in some energy into a skill, and then really getting some results and being able to express yourself more clearly in the way that you want to. And I think that that's one of the big things about pool that attracted me to the game, is that you're out there by yourself, and that when you hit the ball, you're the one doing it. It's your self-expression, and the quality of the stroke that you have has only to do with what you've done, and nothing to do with anybody else's pool game. You've decided to hit it the way you're hitting it, and that makes it your pool game and your self-expression, and that the quality that you put into that has a lot to do with the resolution that you're not going to just mess around and be unconscious about the way you slap the balls around, and that you're going to actually get deeper into it, and resolve to do better. So segueing into the next thing here, fortunately, so as part of that resolution to do better, part of that is you got to level up your attitudes and your precision, and develop yourself consciously through the game, learning how to be more precise, learning how to be more disciplined, more consistent. And that's part of that, how I get better at the game is not just by like doing the same things I've been doing. I will get better if I keep putting in my time. But once you start to be like, okay, I really want to get better at this game, now you got to have like a little bit more of a structured approach and really start to like get into the nitty gritty of what kind of person you are, so you can develop a plan that's going to help you move forward with your particular attributes. In general, establishing a positive attitude over the top of any negativity that you're expressing will help you learn faster, just through the neuroplasticity benefits that you can look up, where your learning rate is, it's factors higher and faster when you're enjoying yourself versus just doing it on a grind, not enjoying yourself. So partly by having an attitude that, you're here for fun, you're here for learning, and that's your perspective, and fostering that and growing it, and, and really working towards creating that positive environment for yourself to play pool, then you'll get better faster, and that allows you then to make better progress. And that's just being a resolution, is like, well, I'm not going to have these petty attitudes that I had going into it, because it's hurting my game and I want to be better, and I need to give up on that sort of activity if I want to be better. So it is just kind of changing who you're going to be. So let me look down here. This is an interesting thing. I saw a reel the other day, and the guy said, one of the ways that I was able to kick my addictions and move my life forward was that somehow I decided one day to like look at what I was doing and look at the end. If I continue to keep doing this thing that I'm doing that I know I shouldn't be doing, and I keep doing it forever, what's going to happen to my life, or what's going to happen, with this behavior? Is it going to take it over? What's going to happen? And then if you apply that lens to your pool game, you're like, well, I know that I need to work on my chicken wing or whatever, because when I swing and I have the chicken wing, it makes my hand come out to the left, and then the Q-tip goes to the right. And then when I hit the ball hard, now some of the time I'm hitting right English. And you have that habit. Now, if you look to the end of your career of pool, and then you say, okay, well, if I continue to keep doing this and I don't spend the energy to learn technique that allows me to be a little bit more repeatable with my stroke, what's going to happen to my pool game? And now you got to make a decision about whether or not it's worth it to change, so that you can have a different end of the road consequence that you're dealing with, or if you're okay with whatever it is that you're doing and that you're not going to make the change. So I think that if you look to the end of the road and say, oh, okay, if I keep doing this and that's what's going to happen, then it's pretty easy to see whether or not you need to let that thing go or not, I think. Here's the thing. I think this is for people that are trying to get better at pool, and they think that they're not making progress, and that if you continue to put in the work and you continue to play and you continue to work on your game and develop, you won't necessarily see leaps and bounds of progress all the time. However, one thing you'll see is that compared to the people around you over a longer period of time, is the ones that don't put in the work do not develop, and that you don't see instantly that you have transcended where they're at to a new level, and they may not have. Just know that that work that you're doing is moving you forward, and if another person is not doing the work, they're not going to move forward. But it's hard to see that right away, because you're only very much getting a little bit in front of them, and that it takes time to see that separation, and that knowing that, another person's laziness is actually the reason why things are so easy for those that are willing to do the work, is that people live off the residual of the skill and the time that they put in, and don't do the work necessary, put in the additional time and energy to continue to increase their ability, you know, because they kind of, you either get complacent or laziness or whatever you call it, you know, and you run out of time, and or it wasn't sustainable for you with your lifestyle, and you just can't figure out how to make it happen. That your ability to be consistent and maintain that focus on it will pay dividends. So another thing, and actually I wanted to phrase this differently, so I'm going to just stop that idea, and then we're just going to go to the beginning of the way that I wanted to talk about it. So this section is going to be about how to be in a situation where, how do I play my best game? And I think that everyone's trying to figure out how to get in the zone and stay in the zone. And it's one of my quests, of course, that I'm on myself. I'll say that one thing that I've found that's very, very important is that when you've decided to compete at pool, and that's what you're trying to do, is win and play your best game in a competitive sense, that one of the things that's important is that you need to convince yourself 100% that there's nowhere else that you're supposed to be at that moment, and that your purpose of your life is to be there absorbing, you know, the stimulus and using your energy to try to move yourself forward into this game and do the best you can by just structuring your life or your mind in a way that there's no other place that you should be instead of here. You don't have to go hang out with your friends after the tournament. That's not a priority. You're here till the end of this tournament. You know, I like got my nap in so I could get a little bit of rest before an evening tournament, or I took days off from work to play the weekend tournament, and now I'm here. And now when I'm playing pool, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I want to be. I chose to be here, and I want to be here, because if I don't want to be here and I'm here, it's going to be very difficult to be as successful as someone that wants to be there, that's there. So in order to really maximize your potential and maximize your opportunity to play well, you kind of have to set yourself up for that through either, you know, having it to where your process for entering the tournament allows you to feel good about what's going on. You know, it's like you don't want to necessarily, you know, take days off from work and play in a tournament when you need the money that you would have made at work, and that you're not necessarily going to make that money playing pool. You might not be as comfortable as you would be if that wasn't the situation. And, you know, that's one of the things that's tough about pools, is that you might have to make sacrifices, you know, like that. And once you figure out how to make your life so where you're not having to make a sacrifice so that you can play pool that's not worth it, all the sacrifices you make for pool should be worth it. Otherwise, it's not worth it. You know, pool has to be the most important thing, and that pretty much means that nothing else in your life is that important at that time to be done, because pool is not really that important in a sense of like, it's just a game and recreational activity for most people. So if everything else is more urgent than that, then it's probably going to hurt your game unless you really like that tension, which maybe you do. I think that it's a better idea to just have your free weekend, you know, where nothing's going on, and then ability to practice a little pool so you can get prepared. And then when you show up, you're like confident, prepared, and relaxed, because you don't really have anything else to do. And you have set aside that time and the energy to do exactly the thing that you're there for. And that's why it's going to be okay to win. All right, so let's see how much more do we have here. Well, we'll do a couple more things. We're getting to be at the end of my talking zone here, but I wanted to talk about one more thing. So I think that a thing that a lot of people deal with, I think most people probably deal with, is like when you're competing at pool, the fear of losing. Uh, it's a complicated issue when you think about all the things that go into like the game itself. I think the best way that I can describe pool in like a tournament or competition is that it turns into a zero-sum game where there's only so many resources to get, and if you don't get them, then you're out of the game. You're dead. You die. It's over. And with that is your scenario, I think people attach their ego to the outcome of if I lose, it's kind of like a death in a sense, and that I'm not okay with dying in the game because my ego is attached to the result, and thus I'm feeling a sense of fear about what might happen if I lose, because uh, a lot of the fear of death, I think, is fear of the unknown of what's going to happen after you die. And I think that with pool, it's like similar in a sense of you have a sense of dread of the conversations and the self-talk that you're going to have if you lose. And that makes it difficult to be okay with losing. And that it's a big thing to deal with, and to eventually learn how to overcome it, you'll have to achieve a perspective that's probably different than that in order to really move beyond that fear. I think that one of the things that is helpful to realize is that if you look at pool as more like practice for real life, meaning that, one of the things that pool can teach you is consistency and discipline and precision with your movements, and that generalized, skill improvement can like lead itself to you learning how to use your hands with other activities and learning process oriented activities a little more easily, because you're familiar with how to do that with pool, because pool is a game, and it's kind of like okay to do the work of grinding it out, learn how to swing your arm properly just to hit the ball so that you can make another ball go where you want. That takes a lot of work to do that, and it seems like, well, it wouldn't even be worth it, but it's actually pretty fun, so we just keep doing it. And with that being said, it's not like that's definitely more fun than learning how to like do some like really long work process, and whatever. But it kind of like is the same kind of thing where you're like learning how to move your body and do an activity that's multiple steps. And if you look at it like part of the thing that you got to separate is that it's just a game, and that we're not actually dying, and that the real growth happens in the rebirth of the cycle, right? You die in the game, and that hopefully that death has taught you something about the way that you lived that life of that game, and that mistake that you made that led you to the place where you died in the game is a lesson that you can use for the next life that you have in the game. And that if you look at it with that viewpoint, that dying in the game is an inevitable part of learning how to blossom and grow from the ashes of that death, and reborn, be reborn and rejuvenated and become a better player through the losses that you incur and the lessons that you've learned while taking those losses. And that's what makes you better. And that is what eventually is a good way to embrace that ideology of having losses be okay and losses be actually the source of a lot of the growth that you have in the game, and that little bit of reflection, and and shake it off and then move on and just continue to see, oh, it's just simple things that I'm not doing here, that if I did them a little bit better, I'd be winning. And that it's not that I'm gonna die if I miss and lose. I've done that enough to know that it's not a big deal, actually, and that I'm making it a bigger deal than it needs to be because of this irrational fear that I don't even need to feel if I can just reframe my viewpoint as being actually healthy. And actually, if you think about it, it's actually part of the fun, where you sign up for the thrill of like, well, maybe I will die, and that actually is more interesting than just going to work. So I'm going to do it, even though it costs a little bit of money, and then as you get better, you're like, ooh, well, I'm learning how to win, and that's actually way fun, etc. But you can't be afraid to lose. That's not going to be helpful. You got to learn how to lose and how to use that loss as a fuel for your growth. Dang, all right, well, I want to do this one too, and then we'll be over. So I think one thing that is helpful for people is to kind of like think about like, okay, well, when, like, for instance, how far out of the pocket does the ball need to be before it goes from being impossible to miss to, at some point, it's missable, and now maybe it's difficult, right? And it's kind of like slow transition from easy to difficult, right? And that opens the idea for like, okay, well, at what point does your truth tell you that you can start missing the ball? Because if the point of contact has never changes, and that's always the spot you need to hit, then now your point of truth, in a sense, where you don't know if you're going to make the ball, is relying completely on your understanding of what your own level of precision is. And that if your level of precision is high enough to where you're almost always going to hit the ball well enough to make it, then now that shot has become true, right? And that mostly that happens as a sensation that you can feel, where you know that you can make it and that you know the outcome of the shot, because you know that your own precision is high enough to do it. And there's no way to know that you're at that level except for by learning how to prove it to yourself somehow, some way, so that you can stop trying so hard to be precise and just let yourself be precise, if you know what I mean, by just doing the action and understanding that my precision is inherent to my movements. It has nothing to do with my desire to be precise. And that once you are not relying on your own precision, and that you are just as precise as you are, and that level of precision is high because of the repeatability and that of your system, then that's when you can start to really prove to yourself that you know a shot, because you can sense that your level of precision is high enough to do the shot, and that now it's about a trust thing more so than it's about anything else. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. We're going to be posting this to the school group. If you guys are interested in any more content, please, make some comments. I'm happy to talk about whatever. I have a long list of stuff that I'm always working to add to the content, and all that stuff. We appreciate